Thank you, Father Sergius, for your inspiring word and for honoring us with your presence today, and in leading us in remembering and honoring Bishop Epiphanius. Our first speaker is Dr. Myrto Theocharous. Dr. Theocharous is a professor of Hebrew and the Old Testament at the Greek Bible College in Athens, Greece. She holds a PhD from the University of Cambridge, where her dissertation focused on lexical dependence and intertextual allusion in the Septuagint of the 12 prophets. Additionally, she has earned an MA in Biblical Exegesis from Wheaton College, Illinois, and a comprehensive BTH from the Greek Bible College. Dr. Theocharous is known for her work in biblical studies and theology. She has authored notable publications, including Lexical Dependence and Intertextual Allusion in the Septuagint of the 12 Prophets, and has contributed to other scholarly work, such as the Central and Eastern European Bible Commentary. Dr. Theocharous will be presenting today a paper titled The Shema and the Trinity, an examination of Deuteronomy 6:4. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Good morning. I'm grateful for this invitation to Agora University and School of Alexandria. And a lot of you must have received a handout through WhatsApp, I think, so I will be using that during my talk. My title is The Shema. I was told it means candles too, or something like this, but I will not refer to any candles. It's a reference to Deuteronomy 6:4. The Shema and the Trinity, an examination of Deuteronomy 6:4. For many people, the clearest evidence of monotheism in the Old Testament is Deuteronomy 6:4, the so-called Shema. It reads, "Hear, O Israel, Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one." Based on this clear statement of Yahweh's oneness, many struggle to see the continuity between the God of the Old Testament and the Trinitarian God of the Christian Church. In this paper, I will explore the Shema and the various proposals for its translation and interpretation, as well as its development in the rest of the Old Testament, Judaism and the New Testament, with the hope of demonstrating that there is, in fact, continuity and consistency between the God of the Old Testament and the Christian proclamation that Jesus is God. So the Shema, the first word of the Shema is the singular imperative form of the Shin Mem Ayin root, which means hear. Moshe Weinfeld places the use of hear in the context of teaching, noting that it is characteristic of the beginning of a didactic address, of which parallels exist in the book of Proverbs. You can see in your handout, we are in point 1. 1:8 in Proverbs starts the same way. "Hear, my child, your father's instruction, and do not reject your mother's teaching." As well as in the Psalms, "Come, O children, listen, hear to me, I will teach you the fear of the Lord." But the urgency in Deuteronomy is intensified due to Moses' imminent death. We could say that the use of the hear imperative in 6:4 functions as an alarm to draw the attention of the audience to something of extreme importance, even to a matter of life or death. The call to Israel to hear is followed by 4 words. You can see it in point 2 in the handout. Adonai, which is how the Jews pronounce the divine name now, but it's Yahweh actually. Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. As Nathan MacDonald says, these 4 words are notoriously difficult to interpret, though they are some of the most common words of the Old Testament. The individual words in order are Yahweh, our God, Yahweh, and one, and there are no textual variants between these words. Though there is no verb among them, Hebrew, as well as other Semitic languages, allow for the category of verbless clauses in the present tense. The relationship between these words is what has caused a variety of readings, some of which we shall attempt to summarize. Of course, as you all know, the name Yahweh is the name revealed to Moses in the burning bush, which is not a generic title for God, but the specific name of the God who brought Israel out of Egypt, the God of the covenant. The following word, Eloheinu, on the other hand, is a generic noun, God, with the first person plural pronominal suffix, our. Having the two words, Yahweh and our God, in that order, we are faced with two syntactical options. The second word may be appositional to the first, or they may be functioning as subject and predicate. You can see section 3, the two options. The first option would be Yahweh, our God, and the second, Yahweh is our God. As Walter Moberly points out, in all these 312 instances in the book of Deuteronomy, where Yahweh and Elohim are juxtaposed, the two words are always in opposition. So it makes more sense to take this clause with the meaning of option 1, Yahweh, our God. In fact, whenever we have predication with Yahweh as a subject, it is always accompanied by the element hu in Deuteronomy, like Adonai hu Elohim. Yahweh, he is the God. So we will go with option 1. The last two words now of Deuteronomy 6:4, Yahweh and one, we have the noun had. This noun has been understood in a variety of ways. The common meaning of the word is the cardinal number 1. There are two options here as well. The word ahad, as you see in 4, may be taken adjectively. It's one Yahweh. Or it may be understood as a predicate, Yahweh is one. If taken adjectively and read with the previous clause, the first two words, it may form a single predication and be translated as Yahweh, our God, is one Yahweh. This option would imply that there are many Yahwehs. And the verse may be understood as arguing for mono-Yahwism, against the multiplicity of sanctuaries for Yahwistic worship and possibly variant understandings of Yahweh worshipped at each one. Ronald Clements says that what it asserts is that Yahweh, the Lord God of Israel, is one single God. He does not exist in many different forms, in different sanctuaries. Neither is he simply the head of a pantheon of gods who in other respects share his nature. It affirms that there is only one Yahweh, but it does not make any categorical denial that other deities with other names exist. Clements therefore proposes that the Shema resists the understanding that Yahweh may be found in different forms and in different locations, but it is unclear whether the notion condemned is that multiple Yahwehs antagonistic to each other are envisaged, or whether the antagonistic worship of the one deity called Yahweh is condemned. Now, section 5 in your handout, in the Old Testament, we have variations of the geographical names given to Yahweh, such as Yahweh of Sinai, we have Yahweh of Paran, we have Yahweh of Edom, Yahweh of Teman. And according to Judah Kraut, however, this way of referring to gods by their proper names, along with their locales, where they were worshipped, was common with the Egyptians and the Hittites. He offers an example from a treaty between Egypt and the Hittites in which the god Seth is mentioned as Seth of Hatti and of multiple other Egyptian cities as well. Concerning Yahweh, archaeological discoveries in Kuntilet Ajrud in Sinai brought to the surface a collection of peculiar drawings and phrases written on 9th to 8th century Pythi, which are storage jars, that mention Yahweh of Samaria as well as Yahweh of Teman. This suggests that people worship different geographical Yahwehs or different local manifestations of the same deity. It is possible then that the writer of Deuteronomy may be envisaging a situation of poly-Yahwism, and a statement such as, Yahweh our God is one Yahweh, would be a polemic against it. However, this view has been critiqued because the multiplicity of toponyms accompanying the divine name does not necessarily betray the belief in multiple gods with the same name. Rather, names with toponyms would be best understood as one deity manifested in different locations. On the other hand, if a polemic against the multiplicity of divergent traditions and sanctuaries of Yahweh was intended, that could possibly be in accordance with the emphasis found in Deuteronomy 12 about a single place where God would select for his worship. However, even if cultic centralization was a concern of chapter 12, such a concern could not be solved by an appeal to Yahweh's oneness. Nobody would understand that this was intended just by Yahweh's one. In addition, as Crowd notes, from a grammatical perspective, biblical Hebrew does not normally allow for proper names to be modified by adjectives, cardinal numbers included. Echad has also been taken as an adverb, meaning alone. This is point 6 in your handouts. First, the problem with this view is that nowhere else does echad function as an adverb, meaning alone. Second, if the writer intended this meaning, they would have used the usual levado rather than ahad. Third, to take ahad as an adverb, it would require translating the first part as Yahweh is our God, a translation we excluded as improbable for the book of Deuteronomy. We shall move on to considering one as a predicate and explore its possible meanings. So, even if we take ahad as a predicate, meaning Yahweh is one, we would still need to define how ahad functions. There is a range of proposals with respect to ahad that spans from an emphasis on Yahweh's ontological nature or character, irrespective of his relationship to Israel, to emphasizing solely Yahweh's soteriological acts, the election, the exodus, the giving of the law towards Israel. In summary, ahad speaks either on God's nature or on the divine-human relationship. Many scholars are happy to affirm more than one meaning. We don't have to commit our lives to a single meaning. Due to time limitations, I will not present all the views today, but I will move straight into the debate between two dominant options on opposite sides of the spectrum. So we go to point 7 in your handouts. Patrick Miller is an example of a scholar who understands ahad as speaking of God's nature. He proposes that ahad speaks of Yahweh's integrity, and the verse declares that God is one and the same without inconsistencies between his will, his intentions, and his acts towards Israel. Miller says that to confess that the Lord is one is to claim that the one who receives ultimate allegiance and is the ground of being and value is faithful, consistent, not divided within mind, heart, or self in any way. In purpose and being, God is one and the same. And similarly, Bill Arnold focuses on character. He argues that the text is an assertion about the essence of Yahweh's character, followed by the demands of that character on the people. More than a simple counting term, ahad possesses a non-numeric qualitative sense, as in the number one or supreme. Because one is not understood numerically, it does not affirm or reject the existence of other gods. On the other end of the spectrum now, we have Nathan MacDonald, who rejects the understanding that the Shema is a statement about the nature of Yahweh, or even about Yahweh's character in abstract terms, and certainly not a statement about monotheism. The mere expression, our God, he says, implies the existence of other gods who are perceived as a threat to Yahweh's relationship with his people. In fact, the same chapter, in the same chapter, Israel is warned, do not follow other gods, any of the gods of the people who are all around you, 6:14. MacDonald understands the oneness of Yahweh mostly through the reading of Song of Songs 6:8-9, where we see the use of Ahad, one in a similar manner. It reads, there are 60 queens and 80 concubines, and young women without number. My dove, my perfect one, is one. To her mother, she is one. She is flawless to the one who bore her. He takes the use of one here as a statement about the woman's unique status, not ontologically, but exclusively with respect to her relationship with her mother. It is not that the mother has only one daughter. Similarly, Yahweh is not the only God around, but that Yahweh is unique for Israel. MacDonald does not mean to say that the uniqueness of Israel is subjective. It is possible for others to recognize this uniqueness as well, but only by relating to him. Patrick Miller's critique of MacDonald's view of one, especially as it relies on Song 6:8-9, is that the use of one in the song does not necessitate the understanding of the daughter's uniqueness. As he says, the mother may have others who are one and flawless. Similarly, Richard Baucham's criticism of MacDonald concerns his failure to deal systematically with Yahweh's uniqueness in relation to other gods. If Yahweh is unique and besides him there's no other, what does this uniqueness consist of? MacDonald argues that in Deuteronomy, Yahweh is not unique because of being the creator or for assigning other nations to other gods, but for his election of Israel. He argues that Yahweh's claim to be God is a soteriological statement more than it is an ontological statement. But Baucham wants to know whether God would be unique even if he did not elect Israel, or whether his uniqueness is exhausted in his electing Israel. He thinks that the content of Yahweh's uniqueness remains unanswered by MacDonald. It appears, he argues, that MacDonald's formulation may be taken simply as a statement that Yahweh is Israel's national God. He says, is Yahweh unique only in, so to speak, taking his commitment to his people more seriously than other national gods do, and therefore requiring more exclusive allegiance than other national gods do? It is not enough to say that Deuteronomy does not deny the existence of other gods. More needs to be said, he thinks, about these other gods. So now I will share a bit of my view, tentative view always, regarding the proposals on the Shema that we have seen. I quote Bill Arnold, who says, "The Shema is not less than these beliefs, but more." But since we all throw the weight of interpretation on a particular aspect as more probable, I will summarize mine as well, which is not new, but a combination of what other scholars have already stated. The Shema, which I translate as Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one, is not communicating philosophical truths, something of Yahweh's ontology, but something about his unique identity. This unique identity became apparent only through God's historical revelation in saving his people. In fact, most of the occurrences where Yahweh is said to be unique and that no other God exists besides him communicate Yahweh's unique ability to save, as he has already manifested to his people Israel, Deuteronomy 32:39, and throughout the book of Isaiah. He's the one who brought Israel out of the land of Egypt, and as a response, he is asking that they shall have no other gods before him. Precisely because no other God has acted for their liberation. This was enough to prove that other gods were unable and possibly unwilling to do so. George Pixley and Clodovis Boff note that who God is in the biblical text is not primarily presented with the abstract categories we have been using in Western culture, such as all-powerful, all-wise, etc. The Bible primarily identifies God as the one who led Israel out of Egypt and who raised Jesus from the dead. And it is this God who is the creator and whose perfection we have to postulate. In other words, one means unique, but unique in that he was able to save while other gods could not. I regard the beginning of the Decalogue as parallel to the Shema, but while Deuteronomy 5:6-7 is stated in the negative form, the Shema is the covenantal statement articulated in the positive form. You can see the table in your handouts. It's 7c. So we see the preamble in the Decalogue, I'm Yahweh your God, and in the Shema, Yahweh our God. The historical prologue in the Decalogue, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. The parallel is Yahweh is one. And the stipulations, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall love Yahweh with all your heart and soul and all of this. The two are clearly not identical, but the Shema may be thought of as a poetic, even liturgical restatement of the first and second commandments. The salvation of Israel was God being true to his word given to the patriarchs, and on the basis of having proven himself to be the only savior, we may now hand over ourselves to him, rejecting all other alternatives. Pixley and Boff put it as follows, quote, the text neither denies nor affirms that there are other gods. Their existence or non-existence is not the case at issue. What is at issue is that you, Israelite, to whom the law is addressed, must base your justice on the prohibition to worship them or ask them for favors. In other words, any God who has not brought you out of the house of slavery cannot be your God. I would rephrase this as cannot carry the title God at all. Therefore, while I agree with MacDonald that soteriology is primary in Deuteronomy, it is primary only in the order of knowledge. The Exodus is proof that only Yahweh is God and all others subordinate. I would also agree with Bockham that Yahweh's salvific acts open the way for Israel to recognize the truth of Yahweh's sovereignty over creation beyond a monolatrous lens. Israel does not limit their reflection on who God is for Israel, but also on who he is in relation to other gods, as well as in relation to other nations. Actually, Deuteronomy shows his sovereignty over other nations in that he gives inheritance to other nations as well. The ontological distinction between Yahweh and the other gods may only be accessed through the particular soteriological manifestation of God, not through abstract philosophical reflection. Now we will look at the Shema in other Old Testament texts. The most explicit allusion, and perhaps the single allusion of the Shema in the rest of the Old Testament, is encountered in Zechariah 14:9. This is point 8 in your handout. And Yahweh will become king over all the earth. On that day, Yahweh will be one, and his name one. So chapter 14 of Zechariah describes an eschatological vision of the day of the Lord. On that day is a phrase that gets repeated frequently in the chapter and confirms the future orientation of this vision. The text seems to take the Shema, which is normally understood in the present tense, Yahweh is one, and turn it into a future expectation where Yahweh will be one. What in Deuteronomy served as a creedal declaration of who the God of the covenant is for Israel, it is now transformed into a future expectation about the universal recognition of Yahweh's sovereignty in the future. The other element that will be one is Yahweh's name in 14:9 of Zechariah. While it is not clear what is meant by his name will be one, we can safely assume that this also has universal implications. There is a long tradition about Yahweh's name. In Deuteronomy, it is used to point to the place of his dwelling. Quote, "But you shall seek the place that the Lord your God will choose out of all your tribes as his habitation to put his name there. You shall go there." Deuteronomy 12:5. The divine name is what worshippers use in order to pray. We see this in Genesis 4:26. They began to call on the name of Yahweh. So it is connected to proper worship. In Zechariah 14:9, therefore, the name will be one in that it will be evoked in a unified and universal worship of Yahweh exclusively. Already in 13:2, another eschatological expectation was given that has to do with the names of other gods. On that day, it says, "The Lord of hosts, I will cut off the names of the idols from the land so that they shall be remembered no more." Zechariah 13:2. The vision described here is for a day when Israel's worship of other gods will come to an end. This is also in Hosea 2:17. On the other hand, calling on the name of Yahweh means entering into a new covenant with him, as the covenantal expressions indicate in 13:9. They will call on my name and I will answer them. I will say they are my people and they will say the Lord is our God. Zechariah 13:9. So what seems to be prophesied for Israel in 13:2 is then escalated to universal dimensions in 14:9. Only one name will be able to save the world. Now we move to the most interesting part, which also has to do with the Trinity, about Zechariah 14:9, which is the way it connects the language of the Shema with kingship. This kingship is no longer limited to Yahweh's rule over his people Israel, but it extends to the whole world. This is section 8 in your handout. A text that comes to mind where the word one and kingship are connected is Hosea 1:11. "The people of Judah and the people of Israel shall be gathered together, and they shall appoint for themselves one head, Rosh Echad, and they shall take possession of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel." Even though one is a very common word, the eschatological nature of the vision and the sense of the unification of the two kingdoms under a single ruler make this text a candidate not for universal kingship, but for the Davidic kingship of a unified eschatological Israel. The problem in Hosea was that Israel had been choosing kings that God had not chosen, nor were these kings following Yahweh, and for this reason they were to be destroyed. The exclusive allegiance of the expected Davidic king is anticipated throughout the book. And similarly, in Ezekiel, we see that he communicates the same unification of Israel under one king. "I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king over them all. Never again shall they be two nations, and never again shall they be divided into two kingdoms." Ezekiel 37:22. Here also, the emphasis on the one and kingship is pronounced and anticipates, in a sense, the universalization of the idea in Zechariah. However, even in Zechariah, while 14:9 focuses on divine kingship, 2 chapters earlier, the high hopes for the future Davidic kingship are outlined with the Davidic house receiving a heavenly status. Quote, "On that day, the Lord will shield the inhabitants of Jerusalem so that the feeblest among them on that day shall be like David, and the house of David shall be like God." like the angel of the Lord at their head. Mark Boda says that this text envisions a shift of the Davidic hope to a heavenly Davidite, something that obviously bothered the ancient translators of the Aramaic Targum, who translated instead that the house of David will be like princes and will flourish like kings, not like Yahweh. The duality of divine and human leadership is also communicated by equating David to the angel of Yahweh in the same verse, who, like Yahweh, led Israel into battle in Exodus 13:21 and 14:19. Although this duality has no rigid distinctions. One thing seems clear: the Shema was never static. And a canonical reading of the Shema points to its future fulfillment. We could therefore conclude that the Yahwistic identity of the Shema had taken an eschatological value that will likely include the one Davidic king over unified Israel and the one Yahweh over the entire world at the same time. This association between the one and only human messianic king of eschatological Israel and the one and only Yahweh, the king of the cosmos, is mystical. Both will somehow be one at the end, an idea that could have perhaps opened the way for the inclusion of Jesus Christ into the Shema in the New Testament. So be patient with me. We will go towards the New Testament now and see the use of the Shema there. First, I will not go deeply into Judaism or Rabbinic Judaism. We'll just say that the theology of the oneness of God became very prominent in the late Second Temple Judaism in order to provide a bridge with Hellenistic ideas. Philo focuses on the supreme ruler who is without motion and different from all others. Josephus speaks of the single, uncreated, and immutable God, and he also connects it to the one temple for the one God and the one race, the Hebrews. And the first translation of the Shema was in Greek by the Septuagint translators. You can see it in point 9 in the 3rd century BC in Alexandria of Egypt. And the Greek reads, Ο Θεός ημών Κύριος εις εστιν, and will be translated as the Lord our God is one Lord. The main difference with the Hebrew here is that there is no proper name in the Greek verse. Lord is a title that translates the Hebrew word Adonai, and unlike proper names, it may grammatically be modified by a numeral, one Lord. Where one Yahweh sounded unnatural, one Lord makes sense, and Lord is going to be the word replacing Yahweh in the New Testament. How the worship of Jesus arose alongside Yahweh in early Judaism is a question that has puzzled scholars for a long time, and still does. Many attempted to find elements in Jewish faith that would allow for an understanding of Ahad, one, that would permit plurality in the Godhead. Scholars who saw a strict monotheism in early Judaism would argue that attributing divinity to another being, namely Jesus, required an absolute break from Jewish monotheistic beliefs. And for this reason, these scholars would normally reject a high Christology in New Testament texts. Others argue that there is no strict monotheism in Second Temple Judaism, and that the presence of intermediary divine or semi-divine figures would provide the necessary ground for a high Christology in the New Testament to develop. Richard Bauckham also finds a strict monotheism in early Judaism. He finds that God's uniqueness in Judaism is centered in two things. First, the fact that he is the creator of everything that exists, including those being worshipped as gods by the Gentiles. And he is worthy of worship because he is the sole creator and sole ruler of all things. God, however, created alone, without any helpers. His servants who carry out his will are strictly subordinated, not co-rulers. And for this reason, worship of any other being is strictly prohibited. The dominant feature of the whole Jewish worldview was the absolute distinction between God and all else. Also, while angels and exalted patriarchs did not participate in the work of creation, the Word, the Logos, and wisdom did. Now, this was the single feature sole creator in 10a. We have another dominant feature of Jewish monotheism, and it was that God was the only ruler of the cosmos. But as we have already seen in Zechariah 14:9, this divine identity was not static in its manifestation. It was becoming. The manifestation of the universal rule of Yahweh was something anticipated. And this was also developed in Isaiah 40-55, where a new exodus was expected, the uniqueness of Yahweh among the gods and his universal rule over all the nations. But this eschatological monotheism, as Bauckham calls it, was still pending because it is in his great act of eschatological salvation, the new Exodus, that the one and only God will demonstrate his unique deity universally. This agrees with our interpretation of the Shema in Deuteronomy, where Yahweh is one, meant the one who effected the Exodus from Egypt. So in continuity with that then, the eschatological Shema on everybody's mouth would come about upon an escalated exodus that has universal repercussions. For God to be one for the whole cosmos, universal salvation must be achieved. But how will this universal salvation be achieved? While in Zechariah we saw God's eschatological reign connected with the reign of the Davidic king, Zechariah 12:8, in Isaiah, the anticipated salvation will happen through the work of the servant. And while the role of an exalted Messiah would not have raised any issues, the appearance of a crucified criminal in the divine identity would be absurd. Bauckham finds hints of the humiliated Messiah in the suffering servant. He says that the witness, the humiliation, and the exaltation of the servant are the eschatological salvation event, the new Exodus, by which the unique deity of God is now identified, such that the ends of the earth acknowledge that God is God and turn to him for salvation when they see the exaltation of his servant. Indeed, the exaltation of the servant in the book of Isaiah is described in terms similar to the exalted Yahweh. The two are equated in 52:13, 57:15, 6:1, thus linking the identity of the servant with the identity of Yahweh, as the identity of the Davidic king was linked with the identity of Yahweh in Zechariah. Only here, the high and lifted up Yahweh is also the one identified with the crushed. In other words, biblical monotheism cannot go back to its previous stage, where it was defined by the first Exodus. It reaches its full definition only through the work of the servant and can no longer be thought of apart from him. He is the one in whom the identity of Israel's God is revealed. Yahweh's new Exodus was effected through servant Jesus for the salvation of the world, and that is not inconsistent with the old story of Yahweh who liberated Israel from Egypt. In hindsight, we can see that the way Yahweh identifies himself eschatologically is consistent with his identity in the Shema, not a departure from it. Yes, God may be surprising, but he is consistent with himself. Bauckham adds that nothing in the Second Temple Jewish understanding of divine identity contradicts the possibility of interpersonal relationship within the divine identity. But on the other hand, there is little, if anything, that anticipates it. So Jesus was perceived as a blasphemer for making himself equal with God, John 5:18, that is, a rival deity. The charge of blasphemy was provoked by his forgiving of people's sins, but also by hinting at his eternal status and the divine name as his own. However, especially in the Gospel of John, we see Jesus use the term one, not in the numerical sense as people using the Shema may have understood it at that time, but to denote unity. When we say these two people are one, we do not mean that they lose their individuality, but that they're fully united. Jesus says that he's one with the Father. I and the Father are one, John 10:30. This Shema language provoked the anger of the Jews who hastened to stone him, 10:31. It is clear that they understood this expression on Jesus' lips as an attempt to include himself in the Shema as another God equal to Yahweh. Their understanding was that they only have one Father, 8:41, but Jesus does not disagree. Jesus is attempting to present himself as unified with the Father, not as a rival God. Jesus' move does not alter the Shema. It may still be understood that this God alone is the only God there is and that only he is to be worshipped. However, at the same time, Jesus broadens the meaning of one to exhaust its semantic possibilities by using it as unified, thus creating no rivalry between the Father and another being, namely the Son. Regarding the second defining characteristic of Yahweh, that of universal rule, Jesus now is believed to share the throne of God and participate in the universal rule of Yahweh. Christians understood Jesus to have been exalted after his death and resurrection to the throne of God and to have been given the highest name, as Ephesians 1:20-21 tells us. And these are elements we have already seen in Zechariah 14, universal kingship and the eschatological name with reference to Yahweh. So regarding the first characteristic of Yahweh, that of creator of everything, Jesus will be included in that too, through the broadening of the Shema attested in Paul in 1 Corinthians 8:5-6. The Shema is referenced by Paul twice. Only the second time, Jesus Christ is brought in as one with the Father. Indeed, I read, even though there may be so-called gods in heaven or on earth, as in fact there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom are all things and for whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and through whom we exist. So St. Paul includes Christ in the Shema by giving him the instrumental role of creation. Through him, he says, which was normally part of the logos or wisdom. And through this move, we have the inclusion of Jesus in the identity of God, but not as a rival God. The same role of instrumental creator is seen in John 1:3. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. The Father and the Son are in absolute unity in all their acts, creation, as well as the ruleship of the cosmos. Conclusion. In this paper, we have examined the Shema in its Deuteronomic context and in its biblical afterlife. In both the Old Testament and the New, we explored a variety of translations and interpretive options for those 4 significant words that make up the foundational creed of Jewish faith, and we concluded that Yahweh, our God, Yahweh is one, communicates primarily that God is the only one who saved Israel and is therefore the only true God. At the same time, the monotheism of Deuteronomy 6:4 is incomplete without its eschatological conclusion. Yahweh will be one in the future, as Zechariah and other prophets anticipate, when a new exodus and an escalated universal salvation will be effected through the work of God's representative on earth. Only then, when the eschatological Shema is fulfilled, we shall have the fullness of the meaning of our one God. Thank you very much.